The cold metal door clanged shut behind him, and for a long second, Nakai couldn't move. It wasn't the sun, though it pierced his eyes after 4 years of fluorescent gray. It wasn't the worn bus token in his pocket, or the plastic bag in his hand that held everything he owned: a broken watch, a faded wallet with no money in it, and a letter from a prison caseworker he hadn't opened. It was the silence. The kind of silence that wraps around your ribs and presses in, not peaceful, just empty. He took one step, then another. The gravel crunched under his boots as he passed the chain-link fence that had been his world for too long. A correctional officer leaned out of the side door and said, "Good luck out there, Begay." Nakai didn't look back. The heat hit him like a punch. Arizona in May had no patience for those who hadn't earned her. The blacktop shimmered, the desert wind scoured his face, and even the sky felt too big. He walked with no destination, just away. Away from the shouts, the echo of slamming cell doors, the stink of bleach and bitterness. Every step felt like walking through wet concrete. In town, the stairs followed him. He hadn't even made it to the bus depot before he felt the old tension rising. The slight shift in body language when people saw his face, his name, his skin. He wandered until his legs gave out and sat on the edge of a drainage ditch behind a gas station, rubbing the back of his neck like he could wipe off the years that stuck to him. By nightfall, he was sitting under the overpass, just off the highway, knees drawn to his chest, listening to the roar of trucks overhead. His stomach was hollow. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He didn't cry, not because he didn't want to, but because he forgot how. The second night was worse. He tried a shelter, but they turned him away, bed count full. He knew better than to push. Instead, he curled up behind a dumpster, behind a shuttered pawn shop, using his thin jacket as a pillow. He dreamed of nothing, just black. On the third day, he pawned the broken watch for $7 and bought a half-dead sandwich and a bottle of water. He sat on a curb to eat across from the courthouse where they'd sentenced him. Some part of him thought someone might walk out and say they were sorry. No one did. A week passed. He learned which gas stations had unlocked restrooms, which fast food places didn't mind him sitting quietly inside. The nights blended together. A blur of concrete cigarette smoke and the quiet humiliation of being invisible and watched all at once. His name meant wanderer in Diné. He tried not to laugh at that. On the 10th day, he woke up cold and hungry, his back sore from a park bench too narrow for sleep. A thin layer of dust coated his clothes. He stretched bones stiff like an old man's and reached into his jacket pocket, searching for his last granola bar wrapper. Instead, his fingers brushed something stiff. Cardboard. He pulled it out. A business card. Cream-colored. Heavy. Embossed in black, Henderson and Associates estate law. Phoenix, AZ. On the back, someone had written in neat blue ink, "Arau, the estate of Talia Begay. Please call immediately." He stared at it, breath caught. His first thought was that it had to be a joke, some scam. Then the name Talia hit him like a gut punch. His mother. Gone more than 3 years now. No funeral. No goodbye. Who would leave this in his pocket? He flipped the card over again, reading it 5 times. The name. The number. The note. His hands started to shake. He walked the 2 miles to the downtown library. He waited in line for a public phone. His palms were damp as he pressed the buttons. The line rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. "Henderson and Associates. How can I help you?" He swallowed, but his voice still came out rough. "My name is Nakai Begay. I got a card. About my mother." A pause. Then, "Please hold." 30 seconds later, another voice came on the line. Male, older, calm. Mr. Begay. Robert Henderson here. We've been looking for you for months. I'm so relieved you called. Can you come to my office in Phoenix today, Sam? Nakai asked, chest tight. What is this about? There was a pause, gentler this time. Your mother left something behind. A property. You're listed as her sole beneficiary. Nakai almost laughed, but it caught in his throat. My mother never owned anything. I'd prefer to explain in person, Henderson said. But I'll tell you this much, it's not a small thing. Nakai gripped the phone. His knuckles were white. Where do I go? He wrote the address on the back of a crumpled receipt he found in his pocket, folded it carefully, walked out of the library into the Arizona heat again. The sun didn't feel quite so sharp now. At the bus stop, he sat on the edge of the bench watching the cars pass. A property. An inheritance. Talia had worked nights scrubbing office floors. She'd clipped coupons, counted coins, gave Nakai the last piece of bread more times than he could remember. What the hell could she have left behind? The wind blew a swirl of dust across his shoes. He thought of her hands cracked and tired, always busy. He closed his eyes and saw her face for the first time in weeks, not the memory from her hospital bed, but from when he was small and scared, and she held him like nothing could touch him. The bus pulled up with a hiss of brakes. Nakai stood. He didn't know what waited at that office or if this was all some mistake. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something that wasn't just survival. It sat low in his chest, unfamiliar but steady. He wasn't walking toward answers. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, he wasn't lost anymore. Why would a law office be looking for a ghost like me? That question looped in Nakai's mind as the bus rattled its way through Phoenix's morning haze. He sat stiff in his seat, gripping the receipt with the address scrawled on the back, like it might vanish if he blinked too long. The air conditioning blew too cold on his face. Across the aisle, a woman in scrubs kept glancing at him like she was trying to figure out whether to feel sorry or wary. He stared out the window instead. A property. That word didn't belong in the same sentence as his name. Talia never owned a damn thing. She rented. She borrowed. She made things stretch until they snapped, and even then she smiled through it. Nakai couldn't count how many nights he'd watched her patch the soles of her shoes or skip dinner so he wouldn't have to. His mother didn't leave behind property. She left behind calluses and silence. The bus wheezed to a stop at Central and Washington. Nakai stepped off, blinking at the glass towers that shimmered under the sun like false promises. He walked 3 blocks past suited professionals' delivery bikes, a man yelling at his reflection in a bus shelter. He kept his head down the way prison teaches you. When he reached the address, 320 North Aspen, the building loomed over him like it didn't want to be entered. White stone exterior, rows of reflective windows, a revolving door with brass handles too shiny to trust. He hesitated, caught his reflection in the glass faded jeans, old work boots, his jacket dusty from nights on the ground. He pushed the door anyway. The lobby was hushed marble floors echoing under his footsteps. A woman behind a sleek desk looked up with that practiced professional smile, the kind that tried to hide how surprised she was to see him. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Robert Henderson," he said, voice rough. "My name's Nakai Begay." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, pity. She tapped on her computer and stood. "Of course, Mr. Henderson is expecting you. Right this way." She led him through a hallway that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, to a tall set of glass doors. She knocked once, then opened them. The man who stood inside looked like someone from another world. Mid-50s, gray hair, cut close tailored shirt with rolled-up sleeves, no tie. He stepped forward with his hand out. Nakai, I'm Robert Henderson. Thank you for coming. Nakai shook his hand, surprised by how firm and warm it was. He sat when offered the chair, trying not to sink too deep into the leather. Everything in this room cost more than he'd made in 4 years. I'll be direct, Henderson said, settling into the seat across from him. Your mother passed 8 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss. Nakai stared at the desk. I wasn't allowed at the funeral. Henderson's expression didn't shift, but something in his voice softened. She left behind an estate, a property near Fort Apache, 200 acres, remote, mostly undeveloped. You're listed as the sole heir. Nakai blinked. You must be talking about someone else. My mom, she cleaned offices at night. She barely made rent. I understand your skepticism, Henderson said. He reached into a folder and slid several documents across the desk. But it's true. The land was left to her by her uncle, Thomas Yazzie, your great-uncle. He died in 2006. Your mother inherited it, though she never did much with it. It's been in the family for generations. Nakai looked down at the papers. A deed with Talia's name typed neatly. County records. Tax documents. I don't get it, he said. Why didn't she ever tell me? Henderson leaned back. She came to see me once years ago. I asked her the same thing. She said she didn't want to tie you to land that had already broken others in your family. Said she hoped you'd build your own life. But she kept paying the taxes. Year after year. Nakai's throat tightened. He thought of her hands again, red and raw from bleach and mop water, writing out checks to keep land he never knew existed. What kind of land is it? He asked. Wilderness. A farmhouse in disrepair, some outbuildings. It's 3 hours from anything you'd call a city. But there's more. About 4 months ago, a development company, Northern Vista, contacted our office. They've been buying land in that area. They did a survey of your property. Discovered 2 things. 1, it sits on top of a significant aquifer. 2, the southern part contains mineral deposits. Nakai stared at him. What does that mean? Henderson reached into the folder again and handed over a letter. It means they want to buy it. For $2.1 million. The number made his vision blur. He looked at the paper again, like it might say something else. 2.1 million. More money than his entire bloodline had ever touched. That's not real, Nakai muttered. It's very real, Henderson said gently. But they're offering low. They're betting you don't know what you have. If you played it right, you could get closer to 3. Nakai couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I've been sleeping behind dumpsters. I know, Henderson said. I hired a private investigator when we couldn't reach you. He found your name on the release list from Fort Grant. I wish we'd found you sooner. Nakai's mouth was dry. So what now? I've set up a temporary ID for you. A bank account. The $8,000 from your mother's savings has been transferred. We can begin the paperwork to transfer the title to your name. After that, it's your choice. Sell, develop, or go see it. See it? Nakai asked. Henderson nodded. Before you make any decision, I suggest you walk the land. Feel it. Understand what your mother held on to. Nakai folded the offer letter, staring at the corner of the desk. Have you seen it? Yes. I drove out there last month. It's isolated. Rugged. But it's beautiful. Not in a real estate brochure kind of way. In the way that makes you stop breathing for a minute. Nakai stood slowly. The floor felt unstable. "I'll go," he said. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll go." Henderson smiled, not smug, not rehearsed, just honest. "That's all your mother ever wanted, for you to have the choice." Outside, the heat hit him again, but it no longer burned. He walked with the envelope clutched in one hand, the weight of $2 million folded inside, and the memory of his mother heavy on his shoulders. She'd held on to land he never knew about. Now it was his, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't money she'd meant to leave behind. "Your mother died with nothing but left you everything." That line had lived in Nakai's head for 2 straight days. It echoed in the space between blinks under his breath when he wasn't thinking. He said it once aloud to himself, just to hear it in the air, and the sound of it made him sit down on the edge of his motel bed like his knees had quit. Everything. 200 acres of land, a beat-up farmhouse, water underneath, minerals buried deep, a number written on a letter that still didn't feel real, $2.1 million. Now, sitting back across from Henderson in his office, Nakai studied the map spread out on the desk. It showed a big patch of earth carved into parcels, highlighted boxes in yellow, a curving dirt road that ran like a vein through wilderness. His mother's name was typed in small print across one of the plots, almost easy to miss. He wondered if she ever saw it in writing. "It's remote," Henderson said, tapping the page with a pen. "Closest town of any size is Sholo. Then from there you're looking at an hour's drive, half of it on unpaved roads. The farmhouse is still standing, barely. Utilities haven't run through there in years. No power, no water hookup, no cell service except on a good day." Nakai scratched his jaw. "And this company, Northern Vista, they've been buying up parcels for the last 2 years. Luxury eco-resorts, high-end retreats, that sort of thing. Think glass cabins and guided authentic experiences for people with too much money and not enough dirt under their nails." "Sounds like they don't want the land," Nakai muttered. "They want to flatten it and make it look like something else." "Exactly," Henderson said. "But what complicates things is this: your land sits on top of a valuable aquifer. Groundwater, clean, tested, stable. That alone raises the price. Add in the mineral assessment they ran low-grade copper and trace silver, and suddenly your land's not just scenic, it's strategic." Nakai leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. His heartbeat hadn't slowed since he first walked in. "My mom never mentioned any of this," he said. "She didn't need to," Henderson replied. "She wasn't thinking like a developer. She paid taxes out of principle, not profit. It was all she had from her uncle. She held it because it mattered." Nakai looked out the window behind Henderson. The city blurred in heat shimmer. People down below looked like ants in motion, purposeful and disconnected. "You said she came here to your office once, 8 years ago. I offered to help her list the land. Told her we could maybe get 40,000–50,000 for it back then. She laughed. Told me she'd sooner starve than sell it to someone who'd chop down the trees." "That sounded like her. She was quiet," Henderson continued, "but sharp. She had this weight to her. The kind of person who walks into a room and doesn't need to talk loud to be heard." "I remember that." Nakai didn't answer. His throat was tightening again. "You look like her, you know," Henderson said after a moment. "In the eyes." He looked down at the edge of the desk. "Thanks," he said, too low to mean much. Henderson gave him space. After a while, Nakai spoke again. "Let's say I do this. I go out there. What am I looking for?" "That's not a question I can answer for you," Henderson said. "Some people see land and think in numbers. Others see a chance to build, or rebuild. I think your mother wanted you to make that choice on your own. And if I want to sell, I can handle everything. But I'll ask again, you sure you don't want to see it first? Nakai exhaled through his nose, long and slow. Yeah, I want to see it. I'll arrange it, Henderson said. We'll get you a bus to Sholo. After that, I've got a guy who knows the area who can drive you the rest of the way. Name's Jonas Nez, retired. Knows every road and fence post up there. Nakai nodded. Henderson reached into the folder and pulled out a thick envelope. This has your temporary ID, the bank account information, and a debit card linked to the savings your mother left. There's also a preloaded phone with GPS. Use it until you get something more permanent. Nakai took the envelope in both hands. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried something more than paper. Thanks, he said again. This time it came out a little clearer. As he stood to leave, Henderson walked him to the door. One last thing, he said. This isn't charity. None of this is pity. Your mother worked hard and planned carefully. She set this up. You earned every bit of what she left. Nakai didn't say anything right away. Then I hope I can make something of it. Just don't rush to a decision, Henderson said. You're not running anymore. You've got time now. Outside, the sky was deep blue, and the heat had shifted from stifling to dry. Nakai stood at the curb holding that envelope like it might break open in his hands. He crossed the street and sat on a bench, ignoring the looks from the suits walking past him. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was another smaller one, plain white. No label. Inside that, a key. Old, heavy, metal worn smooth with time. His mother's key. It didn't fit any door he knew, but something in his chest twisted when he held it. A memory maybe trying to surface through the haze. The sound of her voice humming while folding laundry. The way she looked out the window some mornings like she wasn't really seeing what was in front of her, but something far away. He clenched the key in his fist and closed his eyes. She'd left him land. She'd left him silence and memory, and the weight of something unfinished. And now, whether he wanted to or not, he was going back. Not just to the place she'd kept secret, but to whatever it was that made her hold on. He didn't know what he'd find. But for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out. Somewhere in these mountains, my mother left me a question, and I came looking for the answer. The tires crunched over loose gravel as Jonas Nez's old pickup rattled down the narrow road. Dust kicked up behind them, a ghost trailing the truck in the rearview mirror. Nakai sat in the passenger seat, backpack wedged between his feet, his locked on the winding ribbon of dirt ahead. The pavement had ended nearly an hour ago. Everything past that point felt like a memory he didn't know he had, tall pines growing close, and thick sky stretched wide over red earth and blue shadow. They were far from anywhere now, past cell towers, gas stations, and signal. The air smelled clean like sun on rock and dry bark, and it made his chest ache for reasons he couldn't explain. Jonas didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. You ever been this way before? He asked, his voice low and steady. Nakai shook his head. Not that I remember. My mom never talked about it. Jonas nodded. She came out once or twice. Years back. Kept to herself. Paid the property taxes through the post office in town like clockwork, even when she didn't set foot on the land. You knew her not well, Jonas said. But I remember her face. Strong kind. Quiet. Same way she walked, like she knew she had too much on her shoulders to waste time pretending otherwise. They drove in silence a while longer. Nakai watched the trees thin and widen, revealing glimpses of distant ridges and sloping valleys. The kind of land developers saw as untapped potential, and locals just called home. Jonas turned off onto a smaller road, barely more than a path, flanked by wooden fence posts leaning like drunks. A faded metal sign swung loose from one chain. Private land, no trespassing. Someone had shot it years ago. The holes rusted at the edges. The truck rattled over a cattle guard, then climbed a small rise. At the top, Jonas stopped the engine. "There," he said. Nakai stepped out of the truck. The sound of silence hit him like a wave. The land dropped gently into a shallow valley framed by low mountains that looked painted by hand. At the center sat the farmhouse. It wasn't much sun-bleached boards, sagging porch, one shutter out to hanging crooked from a second-floor window. The roof had missing patches. The paint, once white, had surrendered to the years. But it stood. A single dirt track wound its way down to the house. Beyond it, a cluster of collapsed outbuildings slumped like sleeping animals. Wild grasses swayed knee-high across the field. Wind moved through the place with purpose. Nakai took a slow breath. The air was cool here, even under the sun. Cooler than the city. Cooler than the inside of a cell. "You said you had a key," Jonas asked. Nakai reached into his pocket and held it up. Jonas nodded once. "Truck won't make it past this hill. You'll have to walk the rest. About a quarter mile." He helped Nakai with his pack, handed him a printed map with a few landmarks circled. "Stream runs to the west," he said, tapping the paper. "Old Spring's probably dry, but worth checking. You need anything at all, you hike up the ridge there." He pointed to the highest rise to the north. "Sometimes you can catch a signal. You'll know it when your phone starts beeping." Nakai nodded. "Thanks." Jonas hesitated, then reached into the truck's glove box and pulled out a tin of tobacco and a small pouch of dried cedar. "Leave a pinch by the front steps," he said, "for the ones who came before. It's not about belief. It's about respect." Nakai took the pouch. "I get it." Jonas gave him a look. "I think you do." Then he climbed back into the truck and reversed slowly down the hill. The sound of tires on gravel faded into the trees until only the wind remained. Nakai stood still. He didn't move until he felt ready. Then he started down the path. The house grew larger with every step. Not taller, but fuller. As if the closer he came, the more it remembered what it once was. The wood of the porch groaned under his boots as he stepped up. He paused, took a pinch of the cedar, and left it on the bottom step. Then he unlocked the door. It stuck. The wood swollen from time and weather. He leaned into it, and it gave with a low creak that echoed through the empty rooms beyond. Inside, the air was dry and stale, filled with dust and the scent of old wood and animal nests. Shafts of light spilled through cracks in the shutters, casting long golden stripes across the floor. Sheets draped over forgotten furniture shifted slightly with the breeze from the open door. Nakai closed it behind him and stood in the stillness. He didn't call out. He didn't need to. The house was quiet, but not dead. Each room was worn but intact. A stone fireplace lined the main wall in the living room. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, one with a mattress half-collapsed under a sheet, another filled with broken picture frames and an old sewing machine. In what must have been the master bedroom, he found the trunk. It sat under the window, weathered and locked with a simple latch. The lid opened slowly. Inside, photographs, black and white and sepia-toned, curled at the edges. A child, his mother maybe sitting on the porch steps. A man in suspenders next to a horse. A family lined up in front of a barn that no longer stood. At the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was a letter. His name was written across it in handwriting he hadn't seen in years. He sat on the dusty floor and opened it. "My son, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And Mr. Henderson found you and brought you here. I'm sorry I never told you about this place. I was afraid. Afraid you'd feel tied to something that might weigh you down instead of lift you up. Afraid it'd feel more like a chain than a gift. But I kept it. I paid what I could even when I had to skip meals to do it. Because something in me believed you'd need it one day. And I believe in you, Nakai. I always have. Love, Mom. The words blurred as tears welled up hot and sudden. He didn't fight them. He pressed the paper to his chest and sat there for a long time, unmoving, letting the dust and memory settle around him like a blanket. Outside, the wind picked up through the trees. The house creaked again, not as a warning, but like an old voice remembering how to speak. And Nakai listened. Hope isn't logical, son, but it's all I had to leave you. The letter sat folded in Nakai's shirt pocket, close enough that he could still scan the creases against his chest as he moved through the farmhouse. The floor groaned under his steps. Light filtered in through broken slats, illuminating the dust that danced in the air like slow rain. Every corner of the house carried a layer of neglect, but beneath the rot and wear, there was something else, Bones, that refused to give up. He spent the morning walking from room to room, opening windows where he could, sweeping away leaves, rat droppings, and the dried-out skeletons of insects that had long since surrendered. The house sighed with each touch, not collapsing, but responding. He didn't know if he was waking it up or if it was waking him. By noon, the light was strong and the air inside was breathable. He stepped out onto the porch and sat on the top stair. The pouch of cedar Jonas gave him was still beside the step. The wind hadn't taken it. Nakai touched it gently, then looked out at the wild land in front of him, tall grasses bending in the breeze, the line of trees swaying as if in rhythm with breath. The silence wasn't empty here. It was layered. Wind insects, the distant call of a hawk. A kind of music without melody. He stood stretched and decided to walk the property. Henderson's map, still in his backpack, had a few landmarks marked in pencil. He traced the western boundary toward where the stream was supposed to run. His boots sank slightly in softer earth as the trail dipped between trees. Junipers gave way to towering pines and patches of yellow wildflowers sprang up through the grass. His foot clipped a buried piece of wood, an old fence post, half rotted, still holding on. After 20 minutes, he heard water. The stream wasn't wide, but it was clear and steady. Cold, too. He crouched at the bank, dipped his hands in, and drank straight from the current. It tasted clean, untouched. He sat back on his heels and closed his eyes, the water rushing beside him like a whisper. His mother had walked this land, paid taxes for it, kept it alive from hundreds of miles away with scraps of her paycheck. He thought of her sitting at their kitchen table in the apartment back in Mesa, writing out checks in the half-light. Her brow-furrowed calculator beside her. She'd never once told him. Not a single word. And yet every month, quietly, faithfully, she'd kept this place breathing. Not for herself, for him. Nakai stood and walked further downstream. He found an old wooden bridge, barely more than a few planks over a narrow bend. Moss clung to the wood. On the far side, the land sloped up toward a low hill. At the top was what remained of a small corral, 4 posts still upright, the rest scattered and sun-bleached. Next to it, a rusted-out piece of equipment lay half-buried in tall grass. He brushed away the weeds. It was an old cultivator, the iron wheels locked in place, handles broken. A memory surfaced. A photo from the trunk upstairs. A man beside that same piece of equipment, sleeves rolled up face half in shadow. His great-uncle Thomas. Nakai stared at the tool, then out across the land it once worked. He could see the outlines of what used to be a small garden, maybe. A trail where animals were led. Scars in the earth, long healed, but still faintly visible. He sat in the grass and pulled out his mother's letter again. The paper was already soft from how many times he'd unfolded it. I believe in you, Nakai. I always have. He read the line again and again until the words blurred. This wasn't just about ownership. It wasn't about money. It was about a woman who had no reason to hope choosing to anyway. He stayed out there for hours, walking the edges of the property, touching bark, kneeling in wildflowers, pressing his palm against stone. At one point he stood on a rise where the trees cleared, and the sky opened so wide it made him dizzy. Mountains rolled in the distance like a painted backdrop. He'd never seen sky like that in prison, or in Mesa, or anywhere. As the sun began its slow descent, he headed back to the house. On the way, he passed what was left of the barn. The roof had partially collapsed, but one wall still stood. Inside, dust swirled in beams of light, and nesting birds scattered as he stepped through the frame. He didn't go in, just stood at the threshold and watched. It was too much for today. At the house, he pulled the mattress off the floor upstairs and dragged it to the cleaner room across the hall. It wasn't soft, but it was off the ground. He swept out a corner with a branch and unrolled his sleeping bag on top. Night settled slow. He sat on the porch with a can of soup warmed over a portable stove. The sky turned deep purple stars, waking one by one. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The wind shifted. The cold came down. Nakai sat in silence, the can empty beside him, his body aching in a way that felt real, not from stress or fear, but from work. He looked out across the dark valley. He didn't know what he was supposed to do with this land. Didn't know if he was meant to sell it, build something, walk away. But for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a question, and maybe, just maybe, it had an answer worth chasing. This place doesn't forget the ones who loved it. Nakai stood barefoot in the grass, the morning dew soaking into the cuffs of his jeans. The sun had barely cleared the ridge, spilling honey-colored light across the valley. The farmhouse stood behind him, quiet and still, casting a long shadow toward the trees. He hadn't said a word since waking. He didn't need to. The silence here felt different than any he'd known, thick but not heavy, like the land was listening. He spent the first part of the day walking the perimeter with Henderson's map in hand. The survey lines didn't mean much to him yet, but he followed them anyway, trying to match what was on paper with the living shape of the world around him. The western line curved along a rise where the grass grew tall and gold. On the southern boundary near the mineral site, the terrain shifted rockier, drier, harder underfoot. Every few feet he stopped, crouched, touched the earth. He didn't know what he was looking for, but the act felt necessary. At the far edge of the property, near a bend in the stream, he found remnants of another fence, this one older logs lashed together, mostly collapsed. A rusted wire gate leaned against a tree, half swallowed by bark. Time didn't just pass here. It nested, settled in deep. He walked slowly back to the house, pausing near the old barn again. It leaned like a man with bad knees, but it was still standing. A few planks had fallen, leaving gaps where sunbeams streaked through. Inside, the smell of aged wood mice and hay, so old it crumbled in his fingers. There were signs someone had once tried to fix it. Hammered nails, new boards, half sawed and left. Someone had cared, or tried. He left the barn and moved toward the stream again, following the sound of the water over stones. He found a flat rock by the bank and sat, shoes off, feet in the current. The cold bit his skin in a way that woke something up inside him. He leaned back on his palms and stared up through the canopy. That's where Jonas found him. The old man's voice broke the quiet without shattering it. Found the stream, huh? Nakai opened one eye and turned his head. Yeah. Runs clean all year. Spring-fed mostly. I used to camp near here as a boy. Caught my first trout about 30 feet from where you're sitting. Jonas eased down onto the grass with a grunt, folding himself carefully, like someone who didn't trust his joints anymore. Nakai sat up straighter. How'd you know I was still here? Jonas shrugged. I came to check on the land. You just happened to still be standing on it. They sat in companionable silence for a while. The breeze tugged at the trees. Somewhere a bird called out twice and was answered. You planning to stay? Jonas asked eventually. I don't know, Nakai said. Thought I'd just see it first. Try to understand what she saw in it. Jonas nodded. It's not something you explain. It's something you feel. People come out here expecting instant answers. Most of them walk away because the land doesn't speak their language. I don't think it's speaking mine either, Nakai said. Jonas gave him a sidelong look. You're still here, aren't you? Nakai didn't reply. Jonas reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. He handed it over without explanation. Nakai unfolded it. It was a photo, black and white edges frayed. A man stood in front of the barn, young, sharp-eyed, with a hat in his hand, and a weariness that didn't come from age. Thomas Yazzie. Nakai recognized the slope of his shoulders from the family photos he'd seen in the trunk upstairs. He tried to build a community out here, Jonas said. Not just a farm. Wanted to create a place where kids from the res could come and learn, get out of the city, work with their hands. Teach them how to grow things, fix things, breathe without concrete around them. What happened? Jonas sighed long and low. Life. Weather. Money. Lack of support. He had vision, but not enough help. And maybe the timing was wrong. Or maybe the world just didn't care back then. He ever get closer than most, Jonas said. You're walking on what's left of his dream. Nakai stared at the man in the photo. Did my mom ever say why she kept it? He asked. She said it was the only thing that ever felt like hers, even if it wasn't easy. She'd come up here when she could, sit on the porch, talk to the trees. Nakai smiled faintly. Sounds like her. Jonas stood with some effort. There's a woman you should meet. Works with a non-profit based out of Sibicu. Raina Yazzie. No relation to your uncle. She helps folks restore land, especially native families trying to hold on to what's theirs. Does she know about this place? Not yet. But she'll care. He dusted his hands on his jeans. I'll tell her you're here, if you're open to it. Nakai looked out at the stream, then back at the land that surrounded him. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm open. Jonas nodded, satisfied. You're not alone out here, Nakai. Just gotta remember that. He turned and walked back toward the hill, moving slow but sure. Nakai watched him go, then looked again at the photo in his hand. The way Thomas stood, shoulders squared, jaw set, it looked like someone who believed in something bigger than himself. He folded the photo and slipped it into his pocket. Later, he hiked up the ridge behind the house. The view from the top knocked the breath from his lungs. The whole valley stretched before him, fields and forest hills rippling into the horizon. The sun was low now, and the sky was turning orange. This place didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it had been waiting for someone to come back and listen, waiting for someone to carry the story forward. And for the first time, Nakai wasn't just seeing what had been left behind. He was starting to imagine what might come next. Some people run from this place. Others grow their roots deeper. Raina Yazzie stepped out of her SUV with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she didn't need permission to be where she stood. The tires had barely stopped crunching over the gravel before she was already surveying the land like it was a puzzle she intended to solve. Nakai watched her from the porch, arms crossed, unsure whether to be impressed or annoyed. She wore boots coated in red dust, cargo pants, and a sun-faded t-shirt tucked under a windbreaker. No makeup, no small talk. Her hair was pulled back in a low braid that looked like it had survived both wind and deadlines. She had the air of someone who didn't get lost in the woods, someone who didn't get lost, period. "You must be Nakai," she said, walking up to the steps. "Jonas said you might need help." He was wrong. "You definitely need help." Nakai raised an eyebrow. "That's how you start a conversation." "It's how I start when I'm trying to save someone a lot of wasted time." He gestured to the porch swing, its chain held together with baling wire. "Be my guest." She sat without hesitation, pulled out a notepad from her bag, and flipped it open. "I work with a program called Earthback. We help Native families reclaim, restore, or repurpose land, especially when there's pressure from outside buyers." "Which I've got," Nakai said. "Yep. Northern Vista. I've seen them gut land like this before, leave just enough to make it look pretty on a postcard. They offer big up front, then bleed it out slow. Once they get their permits, the land doesn't belong to the people anymore. It belongs to profits." She didn't soften the words. Nakai appreciated that. "You think I should keep it? I think Raina said that if your mother held on to this place for as long as Jonas says she did, it wasn't for the money. She left it for a reason. I don't know what that is yet. But I think you're here trying to figure it out." Nakai leaned back against the porch post. The breeze stirred the dust, and he could smell juniper and old wood in the air. "She said she didn't want to pass on a burden," he murmured. "But she hoped it might mean something someday." "That's a hell of a thing to hope for," Raina said. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the wind creak the house around them. A hawk circled overhead, casting a long shadow across the yard. "What do you know about groundwater rights?" Nakai asked suddenly. Raina blinked. "More than I'd like. Why there's an aquifer under this place. Part of why the company wants it." She closed her notepad. "Then you've got leverage, but you've also got something more valuable than money." Nakai looked at her. "Time," he guessed. "No," she said. "Options." Later they walked the land together. Raina moved with purpose, stopping to mark things with her pen, a tree grove worth preserving, the stream's edge soil that could support planting if treated properly. She asked questions like an archaeologist digging through someone's memory. "Ever think about a conservation easement?" she asked. "I don't even know what that is." "It's a way to sell the development rights of a piece of land while keeping ownership. You protect it from future exploitation and get some money up front. There are groups who'll pay a fair market rate if the land has water habitat or cultural significance." Nakai thought about the map. The southern section, the rocky side near the mine that could go. But the heart of the land, the valley, the stream, the hill where he watched sunsets, it felt like his mother's voice still lived there. "I don't want to carve it up just to get by," he said. "If I sell, I want it to help me stay." Raina stopped walking and looked at him. "Then you're not just thinking about what to do with the land. You're thinking about what to do with your life." He nodded once. She crouched to pick up a small flower blooming through the dry soil. "Most of us inherit broken things. This is the rare time someone inherited possibility." They walked back to the house as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The land glowed with that impossible gold you only see at dusk, when everything looks both ancient and alive. On the porch, Raina handed him a folder from her bag. "Resources," she said. "Grants, programs, contacts. You'll need help, but help exists. You don't have to do it all at once." Why are you helping me? Because Jonas asked, she said, and because this land doesn't deserve to become another gated retreat for people who've never once set foot on it. She paused, then added more quietly, and because I believe in people who come back to places they don't have to. Nakai didn't know how to answer that. She turned to go. I'll check in next week. Don't wait too long to make your decision. You're not the only one watching this land. He stood there long after her taillights disappeared over the rise. He walked down to the stream again, watched the sky turn deep violet, listened to the wind move like a slow breath through the trees. The ground felt solid under his feet, like something was settling into place. That night, as he lay in the dark on the old mattress with the sound of crickets and the steady creak of the house keeping him company, he pulled out his mother's letter again, ran his fingers over the edges, and for the first time he didn't feel like he was trying to chase her memory. He felt like he was walking the same road, and maybe, just maybe, starting to see where it led. Money can buy anything except a reason to stay. Nakai stared at the letter from Northern Vista Properties like it was written in another language. His eyes traced the same number over and over again, $2,500, $1,000. The letter sat open on the kitchen table, weighed down at the corners by 2 old mugs and a rusted wrench he'd found behind the barn. It was printed on thick paper, crisp, clean, expensive-looking, like everything about the company that sent it. The tone was polite, professional, predatory. They wanted the land. All of it. He leaned back in this chair, fingers laced behind his neck, and stared at the ceiling. A soft wind moved through the broken window pane, fluttering the corner of his mother's letter, where it sat folded beside the offer. The contrast between the two made his chest ache. Raina had been gone 4 days. He hadn't called her, hadn't called anyone. Just sat with the decision like it was a live wire waiting to burn him. $2.5 million. That money could change everything. He could disappear into some quiet town and never worry again. New clothes, a real place to live, tuition. He could finish the degree he never got to start. He could finally stop surviving and start living. But every time he imagined walking away from this land, something in him tightened, like a muscle refusing to relax. He stood, pushed away from the table, and grabbed his jacket. The offer letter stayed behind. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm haze over the field. The grass shifted in long waves. He walked down toward the stream, the same path he always took when his head got too loud. The water moved over rocks in a voice that didn't need words to say what mattered. He crouched by the bank, ran his hand through the stream, and let the cold ground him. I could take the money, he said aloud. Fix everything. The trees didn't answer. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine what the land would look like after Northern Vista got their hands on it. Bulldozers, survey flags, earth flattened, cabins with Bluetooth speakers and blackout curtains, spa tubs where wildflowers used to grow. He opened his eyes. That wasn't the land his mother left him. That wasn't the land his uncle tried to build a life on. He pulled his phone from his pocket and climbed the hill behind the barn, the one Jonas said was the best spot for a signal. Sure enough, 2 bars blinked to life. Nakai scrolled through his contacts until he found her name. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then he hit call. Raina picked up on the second ring. I was hoping you'd call. You knew I would. I knew you'd try not to. He exhaled a dry laugh. You got time to talk? Always. You at the hill, yeah. Stay put. I'll be there by noon. She arrived earlier than expected, truck rumbling up the path in a cloud of dust. She climbed out, sunglasses perched on her head, and gave him a long look. You look like a man trying to walk through a maze with no walls. That's about right. They sat on the tailgate of her truck. Nakai handed her the letter. She skimmed it, then folded it once and tucked it back into the envelope. Standard pressure move. They're dangling a bigger number, hoping it'll make you flinch. It's working. They think you're desperate. I kind of am. She looked at him then, not the way most people looked at him, like they were scanning for damage, but like she was waiting to hear what he already knew, and just hadn't said yet. I've never had anything like this, Nakai said quietly. Not money, not a choice. I grew up watching my mom stretch $20 through a week. I've slept under bridges, and now someone's offering me $2.5 million. That's freedom. Safety. It's escape, Raina said, not freedom. He stared at the dirt. She continued. I'm not going to tell you not to sell. That's not my place. But I am going to tell you this money can fix a lot, but it can't give your life purpose. That's yours to build. You sell this land, you might be comfortable. But will you be whole? He didn't answer. They sat in silence for a while, the air growing warmer as the sun climbed higher. I keep thinking about my mom, he said finally. Why she kept this place. Why she paid taxes instead of bills sometimes. Why she never told me. Maybe she didn't want to burden you with something unfinished, Raina said. Or maybe she knew it wouldn't make sense until you were ready. Ready for what to build. The word landed hard. Nakai thought of the barn, the stream, the valley that lit up at sunset like a fire had kissed the grass, the photos of his uncle, the dream of a community, a place for people who needed room to breathe. He'd spent his life feeling like a weight. What if he could make something that gave others space to stand tall? He turned to Raina. Is it possible to keep some of the land and still get enough money to make it work? There are ways, she said. Split the parcel. Sell part to a conservation group. Keep the heart. I know people. We'd have to move fast. He nodded slowly, like his mind was fitting a puzzle together for the first time. I don't want to sell all of it, he said. But I don't want to sink either. Then let's figure out how to float. Her hand brushed his for just a second before she stood and walked back to the driver's side. You've already made the hardest decision, she said before she climbed in. What's that, to stay? Nakai watched her drive off, the dust hanging in the air, like a trail waiting to settle. He turned toward the house. The offer letter still sat on the table where he'd left it. This time he picked it up, folded it once, and tucked it into the drawer side his mother's note. He wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, not ever. Sometimes choosing to stay means choosing to fight. The knock came early before the sun had risen enough to clear the ridge. Nakai had been up already, boiling coffee over the camp stove on the porch, watching the mist roll across the lower pasture like breath. He paused, cup halfway to his mouth, as the knock came again, slow, deliberate. He opened the door to find a man in a clean blue shirt, khakis too crisp for the terrain, and a clipboard in his hand. His truck idled behind him on the dirt road, spotless aside from the fresh dust climbing its tires. Mr. Yazzie, the man asked, adjusting his sunglasses. Nakai nodded. Name's Greg Halston. I'm with Northern Vista Properties. Mind if I come in? I do. The man smiled, like that answer didn't surprise him. Fair enough. I'll keep this quick. He held out an envelope thicker than the last one. Nakai didn't take it. Halston lowered the envelope slightly, glancing toward the barn, then the house, then the stream, just visible beyond the trees. You've got a beautiful place here, he said. raw, untouched. It's rare these days. Most folks don't see value in keeping something wild anymore. I'm not most folks. I can see that. Nakai crossed his arms. So why are you here? The last offer wasn't enough. We understand this kind of decision takes time, Halston said. We wanted to show we're serious. Our investors increased the bid to $3 million. That includes a relocation bonus, and we'd handle the land survey and zoning costs. Nakai didn't answer. Halston continued. You wouldn't just be selling dirt. You'd be part of a legacy and eco-resort that gives visitors a curated experience of the Southwest. Organic gardens, spa treatments using native herbs, guided hikes along the stream. You could be proud of what we're building. You mean tearing down? Halston kept the smile, but it thinned. I get it, he said. You've got roots here. History. Sentimental value. But at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie. 3 million clean. That's a rare thing. Nakai stepped down off the porch, closing the distance between them. You think just because I grew up poor and did time, I'll cave to a big number. You think because my boots are dusty and my truck's 30 years old, I'll sell off my future like it's a pawn ticket. Halston blinked, caught off guard. Nakai didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. This land isn't for sale. Not to you. Halston held out the envelope again, slower this time. Just look it over. I'll be back in a week. Nakai didn't move. The man finally set the envelope on the porch railing, tipped his head, and turned back to his truck. When he was gone, Nakai let out a long breath and walked into the house. Later that morning, he drove into town to meet Raina. They sat across from each other at the back of the small cafe she'd chosen, surrounded by shelves of homemade jam and shelves that smelled like cinnamon and pine cleaner. He told her everything. She listened without interruption, stirring her tea, but not sipping it. When he was done, she said only, "It started. I figured. They're going to apply pressure. Slowly at first, then faster. Noise complaints. Environmental reviews, power line easements. If they can't buy you out, they'll try to force your hand. I've already made up my mind." She nodded, but her face was hard now. Focused. Then we build your case. Fast. Over the next few days, Raina worked like a wildfire, emails, phone calls, site visits. Nakai followed her lead, learning more about permits, boundaries, grant options, and restoration programs than he'd ever imagined he'd care about. They met with a tribal land liaison who walked the property with them and confirmed that part of the land fell within ancestral roots, news that shifted leverage in their favor if used right. Raina brought 2 more people to the house, Isaac, a soil specialist, and Evie, a water use consultant, who lit up like a match when she saw the stream. You've got something rare here, she said. This water's clean, consistent, untapped. Most rural land doesn't have this anymore. Can I protect it? Absolutely. And you should. We can file a water rights claim. Might even qualify for watershed preservation grants. It was overwhelming. The forms, the meetings, the maps spread across the kitchen table. But it was also something more. It was momentum. On the 4th evening, Nakai stood in the barn with a lantern sorting through what was left. He found old tools, rusted but still solid. A box of faded seed packets. His uncle's name carved into one of the beams above the workbench. Thomas Yazzie, 1983. He ran his fingers over the groove, closed his eyes. Later, he walked to the hilltop alone. The stars were coming in bright, scattered like embers across the sky. He thought about the man who came that morning, with his practiced smile and hollow words. He thought about his mother, sitting alone in some small apartment, choosing again and again to keep this place alive for a future she might never see. She'd fought quietly. He would fight loudly. The next morning, Raina called him with news. They filed a zoning pre-application. They're not waiting. If you want to stop them, we've got to file a land claim now. Cultural significance, water rights, easement restrictions, all of it. I'll drive the paperwork out. Be ready. Nakai stepped onto the porch and looked out at the land. It was wild. It was beautiful. And it was his. He didn't need $3 million. He needed the chance to protect what couldn't be bought. Real change doesn't come from fighting alone. It comes when others show up too. The morning Raina returned with the paperwork, a storm rolled in over the ridge. Not the kind that rattled windows and soaked the land, but the kind that stirred the wind, charged the sky with static, and made the birds fall silent in the trees. By the time her SUV crunched into the driveway, Nakai had already cleared the kitchen table and made coffee that tasted more like burnt bark than beans. She stepped out of the car with a laptop under one arm, a thick envelope under the other, and a look that said she hadn't slept in a while. "They're pushing fast," she said before she even reached the porch. "We've got 2 days to file everything before the zoning board reviews Northern Vista's proposal. If they get a preliminary approval, even temporarily, it'll take twice as much effort to undo it. Then let's get started." Inside, the house turned into a command center. Files laid out across the table, laptops plugged in at odd angles, printed maps, handwritten affidavits, and photos of the stream, the old fence lines, the barn beams etched with Thomas Yazzi's name. Raina handed Nakai a pen. "These are the easement petitions. By signing them, you're declaring that you're preserving specific natural and cultural features on the land. Stream Grove family sites." He signed. "This one starts the tribal consultation process. It doesn't block anything directly, but it brings the local council into the discussion. That slows Northern Vista's clock." He signed again. Raina looked up from her laptop. "We're missing one piece. A community statement. It's optional, but it could help. We need someone else, someone tied to the land or the tribe who supports your claim and will speak on record." Nakai thought for a second, then pulled out his phone. He climbed the hill for reception and called Jonas. The old man answered after 3 rings. "You ready to play defense?" Nakai asked. "I thought you'd never ask." 3 hours later, Jonas arrived with a fresh shirt, a black Stetson, and a worn folder of his own. "Brought old council records," he said, stepping inside. "My dad served on the board when they first surveyed this valley back in the 60s. Got copies of the maps that show the original boundaries before all the subdivisions and lot sales started creeping in." Nakai took the folder like it was gold. Raina smiled. "Now that's what I call backup." They worked until the light outside turned amber, and the wind carried the first hints of autumn in its breath. As dusk settled over the land, Raina connected her laptop to a hotspot and uploaded every document, every form, every scanned photo and signed signature to the county portal. When the last file was confirmed, she leaned back in her chair, eyes heavy. "It's in," she said. Nakai let the breath leave him slowly. Not relief exactly, but something close. He stepped outside. The land looked different now. Not calmer, just clearer. Like it knew what side he'd chosen and was waiting to see if he could hold it. Behind him, Jonas stepped out with 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed one to Nakai. "You're doing right by her, you know. I don't even know if she'd want me to fight this hard. She kept the taxes paid. That's all the answer you need." They drank in silence. A coyote howled somewhere deep in the canyon. The stars blinked into being. Inside, Raina was back on her phone. her voice low, fast, talking to a contact at the State Water Board, then another with the local Preservation Alliance. She was still fighting, still calling in every favor she had. The next morning, they drove into town together to attend the zoning board's open meeting. Nakai wore his only clean button-down. Raina wore a blazer that didn't quite hide the tired lines under her eyes. Jonas came too in boots that had seen 20 years of dust and truth. The meeting room was small, just a few folding chairs in the back of the municipal building, the smell of stale coffee and floor wax clinging to the air. A row of officials sat behind a long table. Halston was already there, suit impeccable, papers in hand. He didn't look surprised to see Nakai walk in. He just raised an eyebrow and offered a thin smile. Mr. Yazzie, one of the board members, greeted. "We received your filing this morning. Quite a stack." Raina stepped forward. "It's all in order, filed under both cultural preservation and water use priority rights." The board nodded. Halston stood. "With all due respect, the opposing claim lacks infrastructure. There's no proof of active use or sustainable planning." Jonas rose next. "You want a statement of use, I'll give you 50 years' worth. This land's been farmed, hunted, and protected by 4 generations. The only thing it hasn't been is exploited." Another member cleared their throat. "We'll take all claims under advisement before final consideration. No decision today." Outside, the air was sharp, clean. Nakai stood on the sidewalk with Raina and Jonas, his hands buried in his jacket pockets. "That went better than I thought," he said. Raina gave a tired smile. "That was the easy part. I don't even know what winning looks like." "Winning looks like staying," she said, "and building something no one can take from you." He nodded slowly. On the drive back, they didn't talk much. The wind through the cracked window said enough. That night, Nakai sat alone on the porch with a notebook in his lap. The stars were brilliant overhead. A fire burned low in a steel barrel he'd dragged from the barn. He opened the notebook and began to write plans, ideas, questions. A list of things the land needed. A list of things he could do with it. Trails, campsites, a small greenhouse, a gathering space. It was messy, but it was real. It was a beginning. And for the first time in his life, he was writing not for parole, not for an interview, not for survival, but for something he could grow into. Something that might outlast him. Something worth staying for. When you finally stand your ground, that's when you learn who stands with you. The wind came hard that morning, rushing over the ridgeline like it had a message to deliver. Dust spiraled across the yard in small circles, tugging at the edges of the blue tarp covering the broken barn roof. Nakai stepped out of the house, tightening the buttons on his flannel, already feeling the weather shift in his bones. It had been 2 days since the zoning board meeting. No updates yet. No news from the county office. But he didn't need a formal letter to know the pressure hadn't eased. Northern Vista hadn't sent Halston back. Instead, they started circling in quieter ways. Yesterday, a white SUV drove past the house 3 times before turning around at the end of the property. The day before that, someone had cut the wire along the back fence. Nakai had found it flopped open, a narrow ATV trail pressed into the dry grass. This wasn't negotiation anymore. This was intimidation. Still, he stayed. He started working the land like he was going to be there forever. Cut away the old fence posts, replaced them with ones he carved from pine. Hauled out the rusted junk behind the barn. Dug a small trench by the stream to redirect runoff that had been eroding the bank. He hadn't told Raina about the SUV. Not yet. He didn't want her to think he was rattled. But that night, he lay awake longer than usual, watching the shadows twist across the ceiling. The next day, Jonas showed up with 2 shovels in the back of his truck. "I figured we'd start plotting that greenhouse you keep talking about," he said. Nakai blinked at him. "Thought you didn't believe in greenhouses." "I don't. But I believe in giving an old man something to do besides arguing with squirrels." They worked in quiet rhythm, digging out the rectangle where the soil was best. Jonas told stories between breaths about Thomas planting squash too early one year and losing half his crop to frost. About a girl who once taught art workshops out here under a canopy strung with Christmas lights. It was the kind of day that filled the lungs. Around noon they heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Nakai stood and wiped his hands on his jeans heart, already tightening. But it wasn't Halston. It was Reyna. And she wasn't alone. 2 trucks followed her SUV, kicking up trails of red dust. A dozen people piled out, some with clipboards, others with camera gear or boots caked in mud. Nakai spotted Evie, the water consultant, waving from the back. Isaac hopped down with a roll of soil testing tubes slung over his shoulder. "What's going on?" Nakai asked as Reyna approached. She grinned. "I made some calls, Kusu. To everyone who's ever cared about keeping land in the hands of the people who belong to it." Evie walked up and slapped a folder into Nakai's chest. "Water rights filing was accepted. Preliminary approval for protection status is in. You've got a foot in the door now. We kick it open." Another woman, older with braids and a clipboard covered in sticky notes, introduced herself as Lita. "I run an indigenous land preservation network. Reyna told me what you're trying to do. If you're serious, we want to help." Nakai looked around. His yard was suddenly filled with strangers carrying purpose. Some took photos of the old barn. Others interviewed Jonas about the family history of the land. Reyna stood at the center, pointing, directing, grounding it all. He felt something stir in his chest. Hope didn't come like a wave. It came like this, a slow rise, a quiet crowd, hands in the dirt beside yours. Later, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Nakai found Reyna by the stream, pulling her boots off and dipping her toes in. "You really called them all?" he asked. "Every one of them." "Why? Because you stood your ground," she said. "Most people talk about protecting land. You did it. That matters." They sat in silence. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke from the small fire someone had lit near the barn. "You remember what you said about escape and freedom?" Nakai asked. "Yeah. I think I finally get it. Escape's about running. Freedom's about staying and owning what you build." She smiled. "Sounds like something your mother would have said." "I think so too." Back at the house, people were setting up tents. A few had brought food, fresh tortillas, beans, roasted corn wrapped in foil. Someone started singing softly near the fire. It wasn't a party. It was a promise. Jonas handed Nakai a plate and raised his cup. "To standing your ground," he said. Nakai tapped his cup against the old man's. He looked around at the faces, some familiar, some not. All here for a reason. This wasn't just about zoning permits anymore. It wasn't about water rights or grant deadlines or legal fights. It was about community, about legacy, about choosing to be rooted when it would have been easier to float away. That night, as he lay in his sleeping bag on the porch with the stars flickering overhead and the sounds of quiet laughter drifting from the yard, Nakai thought of his mother. She'd never seen this. But maybe she knew it was possible. And maybe that was enough to have left the land behind with nothing but her name and a silent hope he'd one day find it. He closed his eyes and let the land hold him. "She didn't leave me land. She left me a reason to become the kind of man who could care for it." The morning sky cracked open in hues of copper and gold as Nakai stepped out onto the porch, a mug of strong coffee warming his hands. The storm that had threatened the night before had passed, leaving the air cool and clean, the land washed and quiet. Water clung to the tall grass like beads of glass, and somewhere down by the creek, birds had already begun calling the day awake. He stood there for a long while, letting the warmth settle into him, not just from the cup, but from the way everything felt connected now. Not perfect, not safe, but stitched together by something stronger than ownership. He had never imagined feeling this kind of calm. Not after the places he'd come from. Not after the years that took more than they gave. Behind him, the house creaked gently as Raina moved through the kitchen, her footsteps soft, her voice low as she spoke to someone on the phone. She was staying through the weekend to help finalize the last of the filings. By then, the preservation group would have a preliminary agreement in place giving the land status as a protected cultural and ecological site. There'd still be work surveys, legal battles, restoration projects, but now Nakai wasn't facing it alone. He walked the path to the stream boots, damp from the dew. As he crossed the shallow bend, he caught his reflection in the water, older than he remembered, weathered from the weeks spent fighting for this place. But his eyes were steady now, no longer haunted by that wide, restless stare of someone who didn't know where he belonged. Halfway to the southern ridge, he passed the small stone marker he and Jonas had placed 2 nights before. A simple flat rock hand-etched with the words, "For Ruth Yazzie, who remembered what mattered." They hadn't held a ceremony. Just lit a candle, said her name, and let the wind carry the rest. The land sloped upward, leading to the high ground that overlooked the entire valley. Nakai stood there now, arms crossed, watching the movement of clouds cast long shadows over the fields. He could see the path they'd cut for the greenhouse, the outline of where they'd place benches beneath the old oak, and the gentle curve of the stream as it ran silver through the land like a lifeline. He pulled the final letter from his back pocket. It had arrived the day before in a manila envelope. Halston's signature at the bottom, slick and confident, as if the ink alone could change a man's mind. The offer had climbed again, now 4 million. He didn't even hesitate this time. He tore the letter in half, then again letting the pieces scatter into the wind like ash. When he got back to the house, Raina was sitting at the kitchen table barefoot, scrolling through her laptop. Her hair was loose, her coffee going cold beside her. She looked up and smiled without needing to ask. He smiled back. Jonas arrived later that morning with his grandniece Talia, a sharp-eyed teenager who took one look at the place and declared it barely hanging on but kind of amazing. She and Nakai walked the fence line together, Talia peppering him with questions about what it used to be and what it was going to become. "Are you building a school?" she asked. "Not exactly, but maybe workshops, space to learn." For who, he thought for a second. Whoever needs it. Later, while Talia took photos of the barn's beams and Raina updated permit files, Jonas pulled Nakai aside and handed him a box wrapped in canvas. "Your uncle's tools," he said. "I kept them when he passed. Figured they'd find their way back." Inside there was a hammer worn smooth by years of use, a hand-carved level, a measuring tape marked in ink with faded notes. Nakai ran his fingers over them like he was touching the past itself. "Think they'll still work?" he asked. Jonas chuckled. "Tools don't forget how to do their job. They just wait for someone ready to use them right." That afternoon, neighbors began to arrive. Word had spread about the fight, about the land, about the man who chose to stay. They brought dishes of food, donated seedlings, and buckets of nails. Some brought stories, memories of Nakai's mother or uncle. Others simply came to put their hands in the dirt. By sundown, they'd raised the new fence line together. Nakai stood back as the final post was set, the sound of hammers ringing out like a declaration. He wiped the sweat from his brow, dirt streaked across his arms, boots caked and cracked, his back sore in all the right places. He felt alive in a way no paycheck, no clean apartment, no downtown skyline had ever offered him. As the sun dropped low, painting the land in orange fire, Raina stepped up beside him. "You did it," she said. "We did." "Think she'd be proud?" she asked. He looked out over the land, wind tugging at the grass, the old oak standing tall at the edge of the horizon. "She didn't want me to be safe," he said. "She wanted me to be whole." Raina slipped her hand into his. Neither of them spoke again for a long while. The stars rose clear that night. Someone played an old hand drum near the fire. Children laughed in the field. People shared food and stories like they belonged to each other. And in the quiet between sounds, Nakai felt something settle deep inside him, a kind of peace he never thought he'd earn. The land didn't just hold his mother's memory now. It held his choice, his roots, and everything he was finally becoming.